it with a good attitude, you know? I do it all the way, right away, with a good attitude. That's obedience. The second flavor of respect is called submission. Submission is what happens when I fail to obey the speed limit and the cop catches me. I submit by pulling my car off to the side of the road. I was disobedient, but I can still submit. Follow that? So I pull off my car to the side of the road, I receive the ticket, and I am in submission to the rules of the government, even though I disobey. And then the third flavor of respect is honor. That even if I'm in a situation where I can't obey and I cannot submit, I can still show honor. Let me give you a description of that. The ancient first century church was persecuted for believing in Jesus. And so the leaders came up to them and said, "Stop teaching about Jesus." And they refused. They would not obey. And so then they said, "We're going to throw you into jail." And Peter was in jail at one point, ready to be killed or persecuted or flogged or something the next morning, and an angel came and released him from the jail. So he was no longer even in submission to the governing agencies because he was released from that jail. However, the next morning, when the magistrates began to talk to him about this whole circumstance, he demonstrated that he still honored their authority, and he never spoke a negative word about them. And so respect is something that goes in different flavors, and you have to be able to understand them fully in your own life and understand how to apply them. And I'm sorry I don't have enough time to get into all that stuff today, but I'm just going to bring it back down to the rule. The rule is our family respects authority. Build a family that respects authority, and you've got a strong foundation for the future. Rule number two. Rule number two is that our family exemplifies love. In Ephesians 5:25, it says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." Last week we talked a little bit about love, and we talked about how love is the one-sided, full abandon effort of a person to heal his or her enemies. The one-sided, full abandon effort to build another person up, to see another person become everything that that other person can become. And so that's what Jesus did for us, and that's what God says husbands need to do for wives, and parents need to do for their children, and leaders need to do for their followers. That's what God's word says has to happen anytime you're in the top-down direction of that authority situation. And we want to say that our families will exemplify a Christ kind of love. We sacrifice ourselves for each other. We give of ourselves to each other without expecting anything in return. And we are willing to be one-sided about it. Even if you punch me, I am still going to smile and say, "I still love you and I forgive you." We are willing to be one-sided in our families when it comes to showing love. And we want to outdo each other in showing love. Can you just imagine what it would be like if people saw your family and said, "Now that's a family that knows what real love is all about"? That'd be awesome. Make it a ground rule. And when person in your family fails to show love, employ a little authority. Okay, moving on. Rule number 3. Our family is a refuge from the world. I think this is a rule that you need to make abundantly clear to your children, to your spouse, even to yourself. If you're single, you need to say, "My home is a refuge from the world." There are values and systems in the world around me that do not enter this place. There are things that people want in this world that do not come into this place. They do not come into the circle of my family. I'll just give you an example here from 1 Corinthians 7. Paul says, "But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife." And so in this kind of passage, it's trying to tell us about marital sexual relationships. But it begins with this concept that I think is just utterly practical to us today. It says this sentence at the beginning. It says, "Since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. That means we live in a world that is just filled with immorality. It's filled with the wrong ideas about sex. It's also filled with the wrong ideas about money. It's filled with the wrong ideas about desires. It's filled with the wrong ideas about just about everything. And so that's why, because this world is filled with so much immorality, we need to have our own wives, husbands, our own spousal relationship. It's saying, in your family, create something that is holy and wholly different from the rest of the world. Make it a refuge. You know, in your family, everything sexual has to be only between the husband and the wife. Make sense? That's not the way the world around us views it. They say, no, there can be magazines, and there can be TV shows, and there can be internet sites. Those things are viable other things. And you say, no. Because there is so much immorality in this world, we have a marriage relationship. And we keep it within this relationship, this human-to-human relationship. Now, there are other things. There's, of course, I mentioned money and other morals and stuff. And so I just want to remind you, or let you know, maybe you didn't know this, but in a couple weeks, next week is our last week on Family Secrets, and because money is such a big issue when it comes to families, we're going to take a 6-week series following this series to talk about money. We're going to be looking at a book called The Treasure Principle, and every one of you is going to get a free copy. And if you want to invite your friends, they can get a free copy too. I believe we have maybe 40 of them, so that's quite enough for one per family. So you're all going to get a copy of this book, and we're going to go through it. There are 6 principles in this book on how to understand money from God's perspective. And it's going to transform your marriage. It's going to transform your life. It's going to transform your family. It's going to be amazing. And so I encourage you to make sure you come back for that. I don't have time to talk about money today. But here's the last rule. Rule number 4. Our family handles conflict with grace and truth. Our family handles conflict with grace and truth. That's hard for us to grasp because we didn't learn it from other people. And so I'm going to give you the 3 kind of bullet points of what grace and truth looks like. It goes like this. Number 1, when you have an issue, you focus on what's clearly true. Okay, little boy, little girl, they're screaming at each other. And you come running into the room, and they're screaming at each other, and they're grabbing each other and wrestling. And you pull them apart, and you say, what happened here? And she says, well, he punched me. And he says,